Some people are born invisible. Others learn it the way drowning men learn to hold their breath. Raven Cole polished the brass doorknob on the third-floor study, with the kind of precision surgeons reserve for incisions. Not because Mrs. Park would notice, she wouldn't, but because the rhythm kept her hands from shaking. 11 years of cleaning other people's fingerprints off surfaces they'd never look at twice had taught her that survival wasn't about being seen. It was about perfecting the art of not being there at all. The Park estate sprawled across Beacon Hill, like old money personified, marble that swallowed footsteps, chandeliers that cost more than her mother's medical debt, rooms so vast they seemed to curve at the edges. She moved through it the way ghosts must move through walls present but immaterial, necessary but never acknowledged. The mathematics of invisibility were simple. Once you learned them, keep your eyes down. Anticipate needs before they're voiced. Exist in the negative space between their thoughts. She pressed the cloth into the grooves of the doorknob, feeling the metal warm under her palm. Through the study window, she caught her first glimpse of him. Ethan Park stood in the garden below, framed by hedges trimmed into geometric perfection. Even from 3 floors up, she could read the language of his posture, spine straight as a verdict, shoulders that had never known the weight of apology. He moved with the kind of certainty that came from never having been told no. 28, heir to a pharmaceutical empire, and colder than the January air that fogged his breath. He occupied space the way conquerors occupied territory, without asking, without question, without a single backward glance at what he crushed beneath his feet. She looked away. Looking was dangerous. The rag caught on something, a loose thread in the seam of her uniform sleeve. For a moment, her hands stilled. Once, those hands had done more than clean. Once, they'd moved across piano keys with the kind of fluency that made professors stop mid-sentence. Prodigy, they'd called her. Scholarship material. Before her mother's diagnosis turned their lives into a countdown. Before medical bills became a mathematics she couldn't solve. Before she learned that talent was a luxury and invisibility was survival. Before the debt found teeth and started hunting. She yanked the thread free and moved down the corridor. Linen, glass, surfaces that reflected nothing but absence. The house had a quality she couldn't name, a sensation like being watched by architecture itself. Sometimes she felt it most in the empty spaces, hallways that stretched too long, doors that seemed positioned to catch peripheral movement, the particular silence that comes before something breaks. She reached the east corridor, the one that connected the main house to the old wing. Her cart stood exactly where she'd left it, cleaning solutions aligned, towels folded, everything in its place. Except the carpet. The Persian runner showed fresh vacuum lines, parallel, methodical, recent. She'd cleaned this section 2 hours ago. The pattern of her work was still visible in the pile, but now, cutting across her tracks like a signature, was a second set of marks. Someone had been here. Someone had walked this corridor while she was 3 floors up, polishing brass that didn't need polishing. Raven's pulse kicked against her throat. She looked left, then right. The hallway stretched empty in both directions, but emptiness meant nothing in a house this size. The estate had 17 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, a library, a ballroom, servants' quarters, and whole wings the family never used. Plenty of places to stand, plenty of places to watch. She gripped the handle of her cart and kept moving, even as her hands betrayed her with their trembling. Because that was the other rule of invisibility. Never let them see you afraid. Never let them know you've noticed. Never acknowledge that you're prey. The study door was supposed to be locked. Raven heard the voices from the second-floor landing low, male, threaded with the kind of tension that precedes violence. She should have turned around, should have retreated to the servants' quarters where ignorance was currency and survival was silence. But her feet carried her forward, drawn by something older than logic, deeper than self-preservation. Through the crack in the door, she saw 3 men. Ethan stood behind his desk, expression carved from ice. The other 2 blocked the exit, one broad-shouldered and sweating, the other lean with the stillness of a loaded gun. "Your father made promises," the lean one said. His hand disappeared into his jacket. Raven moved. No thought. No permission from fear. Just her body crossing the threshold, placing itself between Ethan Park and the barrel of a weapon she recognized from the shape of the man's reaching hand. The mathematics of trajectory were simple. If he drew, if he fired, the bullet would find her first. Time fractured. Glass exploded somewhere to her left. Shouting erupted words without meaning. Syllables drowned in adrenaline. The metallic tang of blood filled her mouth where she'd bitten her tongue. Hands grabbed her, Ethan's hands, she realized, distantly dragging her backward as the broad-shouldered man lunged forward. Furniture overturned. The smell of iron mixed with expensive cologne and gun oil. She hit the floor. Pain bloomed across her shoulder, hot and spreading. Above her, Ethan's face appeared, and for the first time since she'd entered his house, he looked at her. Not through her, not past her, at her, like she was solid, real, a person whose absence would leave a hole in the world. Raven. Her name in his mouth sounded like a command he didn't understand, desperate and furious and afraid. The room tilted. Darkness crept in from the edges, soft as velvet, heavy as drowning. She tried to tell him she was fine, that invisibility was supposed to protect you, that this wasn't how the story was supposed to go. But her tongue wouldn't work, and her lungs felt full of water, and somewhere very far away, Ethan Park was calling her name like it mattered. Like she mattered. The last thing she heard before the world went black was his voice, raw and breaking. Stay with me. Hospital White had a particular quality of violence. Raven woke to machines breathing for her, tubes mapping her body like a topography of failure. The ceiling tiles were acoustic foam, water-stained in one corner. She counted them 12 by 14 while her mind tried to assemble the pieces of what had happened. The study, the gun, Ethan's hands. The door opened. Not a nurse, not a doctor. Ethan Park, looking like he hadn't slept in days, exhaustion carving shadows under his eyes that made him seem almost human. He stopped when he saw her awake, something crossing his face too quickly to name. The surgeons say you'll recover fully, he said. No greeting, no apology. Just facts, delivered in that surgical tone he wielded like armor. I've covered everything. The procedures, the room, physical therapy, when you're cleared for discharge. The words hit her like a second bullet. She'd seen this movie before. Medical debt had killed her mother, not the cancer, but the crushing mathematics of trying to survive it. Bills that multiplied like cancer cells, interest that metastasized, collectors who called at 3 a.m. because desperation kept better hours than hope. She'd spent years running from that debt, and now here it was again, wearing a different face but speaking the same language. I can't. Her voice came out ruined. Sandpaper rough. You already have. He moved closer, and she saw the exhaustion wasn't just physical. Something had shifted in him. Some fundamental calculation reordered. When he looked at her now, it was with an intensity that felt like being trapped under glass. Why did you do it? The question hung between them, genuine and dangerous. She could lie, should lie, but the morphine made her honest, and the honesty made her reckless. I saw you. 3 words. They landed like a confession. His jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he might leave, retreat, back into the cold precision she understood, the distance that kept servants and employers in their proper orbits. Instead, he sat in the chair beside her bed, close enough that she could see the fine tremor in his hands. No one sees me, he said quietly. They see the name, the money, the empire my father built on bones and ambition. He looked at her then, really looked, and she understood with sudden, terrible clarity that being seen by a man like Ethan Park wasn't salvation. It was the beginning of something that would consume them both. The East Wing bedroom had a view of the garden where she'd first seen him. For your safety, Ethan had said when the ambulance delivered her back to the estate instead of her apartment. Until we're certain there are no further threats. Protection, he called it. But Raven knew the architecture of cages, how they arrived, disguised as concern, how the bars were painted to look like care. She'd been moved from the servants' quarters to a room with crown molding and silk curtains, given a closet full of clothes that fit her perfectly, provided with books she'd mentioned loving in conversations she didn't remember having. He knew too much. The realization arrived slowly, puzzle pieces assembling into a picture she didn't want to see. Her coffee order, her mother's favorite hymn, the scar on her left knee from a childhood fall, details too small for casual observation, too precise for coincidence. Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, brought dinner on a silver tray. The older woman had started treating Raven differently, not like staff, but like something precious that might break if handled roughly. She fluffed pillows with maternal efficiency and left the door cracked open, a small rebellion against the suffocating care. "He sits outside your door at night," Mrs. Chen said, arranging the napkin just so. "Mr. Park doesn't sleep, just watches." The information should have frightened her. It did frighten her, but beneath the fear lived something else, a treacherous warmth that had no business existing. Nights became conversations. Ethan would appear after the house went dark, settling into the chair by her window like he'd been summoned. They talked about everything and nothing his childhood spent in boarding schools, where affection was weakness, her mother's fierce love that couldn't save itself, the way loneliness carved out spaces inside people until they became echo chambers of want. He'd been raised like a weapon, she realized, sharpened and aimed and never allowed to be soft. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted one night, moonlight turning his profile into something classical and cruel. How to want someone without owning them. The honesty terrified her. The vulnerability made her reckless. She reached for his hand. He pulled back like she'd burned him, and for a moment the mask cracked completely. Fear lived there raw and unfiltered, the fear of a man who'd learned that everything he touched either left or was destroyed. 2 weeks later, sorting through the box of personal items someone had retrieved from her apartment, Raven found it. Her mother's wedding ring, the one she'd kept in a locked drawer, wrapped in tissue paper and hidden at the back of her underwear drawer. The tissue paper was fresh, recently replaced. Her hands shook as understanding crystallized. Ethan hadn't just entered her apartment while she was unconscious. He'd searched it, cataloged it, touched the most intimate corners of a life she'd never offered him access to. The line between protection and possession didn't blur. It had never existed at all. She found him in the library, surrounded by leather-bound books he'd probably never read, and shadows that seemed to gather in his wake. "You went through my things." No question. Accusation delivered flat and hard. Ethan didn't flinch, didn't offer the mercy of denial. He simply turned from the window, expression unreadable, and said, "Yes." The admission landed like a slap sharp and clarifying. Raven had expected excuses, justifications wrapped in concern. Instead, he gave her the brutal efficiency of truth. "I needed to know who you were," he continued, each word measured and deliberate. "What you wanted, whether you were real or another play in a game I didn't see coming. So you invaded my privacy, cataloged my life like I was a security risk. You threw yourself in front of a bullet for me." His voice cracked, just slightly, revealing the fault line beneath the control. "People don't do that. Not in my world. Not without calculation. Maybe your world is the problem." The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Then Ethan moved, crossing the distance until he stood close enough that she could see the storm in his eyes, the war between what he'd been taught and what he felt. "My father funded your mother's final treatments," he said quietly. "The experimental protocol, the hospice care, all of it." The room tilted. "What?" 3 years ago. Anonymous donation to the foundation that covered her costs. He pulled out his phone, brought up documents she recognized, her mother's medical files, payment records, a paper trail that led directly to Park Pharmaceuticals' charitable fund. He never told me why. I found the records after he died, started digging, found you. Destiny, she'd thought when she got the cleaning job. Miracle, when the debt collectors finally stopped calling. But miracles were machinery when you looked close enough. And fate was just another word for being moved like a chess piece by hands you couldn't see. "I was never random," she whispered. "You knew who I was before I ever stepped foot in this house." Yes. The honesty should have destroyed whatever fragile thing existed between them. Should have sent her running back into invisibility where survival was simpler and wanting didn't hurt. Instead, she felt something else rising, a rage so pure it felt like clarity. "You had no right. I had every right." He stepped closer, and she saw the desperation beneath the arrogance. "My father played chess with people's lives. I needed to know if you were another one of his pawns, or if—" He stopped, jaw working like the words fought to stay buried. "Or if what? Or if you were real?" His hand lifted, hesitated an inch from her face. "If this, whatever this is, was something I chose instead of something he engineered. Love shouldn't surface in moments like this. Not when trust lay shattered between them. Not when every word revealed another layer of manipulation. But it did anyway, complicated and unwilling, rising like a tide that didn't ask permission." Raven caught his wrist before he could pull away, holding his hand suspended in the space between them. "I'm real," she said. "The question is whether you are." His fingers finally touched her cheek, and she understood with terrible certainty. She'd been chosen, not by fate, but by design. The only question left was whether she'd choose him back. The envelope arrived with breakfast, tucked beneath the morning paper, like a secret Mrs. Chen couldn't bear to speak aloud. Inside, photographs. Raven sleeping, face soft and unguarded. Raven walking the garden paths, sunlight caught in her hair. Raven laughing at something on her phone, head thrown back in a moment of unself-conscious joy. Dozens of them, taken from angles that made her skin crawl through windows, from doorways, positions that required access to the estate itself. Someone had been watching. Not Ethan with his clumsy, obvious invasion of her apartment. Someone else. Someone who moved through the house like smoke, invisible as she'd once been. She found Ethan in his office, already surrounded by security footage and personnel files. He looked up when she entered, saw the envelope in her hands, and his expression went glacial. "How long?" she demanded. 3 weeks. Since you moved to the East Wing." He pulled up camera feeds, hallways, gardens, her bedroom door. "Whoever it is knows the blind spots. Moves during shift changes. Professional." "Who?" "My head of security flagged it yesterday. We're narrowing the list." He stood, crossed to where she'd frozen in the doorway. "I won't let anyone hurt you." The promise should have comforted her. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, wind howling at her back. Because protection in Ethan's world came with a price: freedom, privacy, the small sovereignty of choosing your own risks. "There's a meeting tonight," Ethan continued, returning to his desk with the focused intensity of a man preparing for war. "Someone claiming to have information about my father's final dealings, about why he helped your mother, about who's watching you now. It's a trap, probably." He smiled, and it was the coldest thing she'd ever seen. But the truth is worth the risk. That night, Raven watched from the East Wing window as Ethan climbed into the car. Marcus, his head of security, drove the same Marcus who'd been with the family for 15 years, who knew every corner of the estate, who moved with the invisible efficiency of someone who understood how to disappear. The same Marcus who'd been in the background of 3 of the photographs, positioned just right to have taken them himself. Her blood went cold. She ran. The warehouse district at midnight looked like the set of every noir film ever made. Broken windows reflecting fractured moonlight. Industrial ruins, breathing rust and abandonment. Raven's Uber dropped her 2 blocks away. She'd stolen Mrs. Chen's phone, bypassed Ethan's security protocols, tracked his location through the app he didn't know she'd found. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she ran, heels abandoned after the first block, dress hiked up to her thighs. She wasn't saving him. Not this time. This time, she was choosing actively, deliberately, to stand beside someone instead of in front of them. The warehouse loomed ahead, Through the broken windows, she saw movement figures circling like wolves. Ethan, in the center with his hands raised. Marcus behind him with a gun that hadn't been drawn to protect. Envy wearing loyalty's face. It was always the ones you trusted. Raven didn't think. She grabbed a piece of rusted rebar from the rubble, tested its weight, and smashed through the side entrance. Chaos erupted. Marcus spun, gun swinging toward Ethan's spine. Raven threw the rebar with every ounce of strength desperation provided. It caught him across the temple, not enough to kill, but enough to destroy his aim. The shot went wide, buried itself in concrete, and then Ethan was moving with the lethal grace of a man who'd survived by being faster than mercy. The other men scattered. Marcus tried to rise, blood streaming from where metal had kissed skull, but Raven was already there. Not with a weapon this time, with words. 15 years, she said, voice steady despite her shaking hands. You watched him grow up, served his father, and you sold him for what money? Revenge? The pathetic satisfaction of tearing down something you could never build? Marcus smiled through the blood. You think you know him? He's his father's son. Power has a price, and eventually, it consumes everyone who touches it. Then we'll burn together. Ethan's voice, cold and final. The gun in his hand was Marcus's own, taken during the struggle, now aimed with the certainty of someone who'd stopped believing in redemption. But you won't live to see it. The shot echoed through the warehouse, final as a period. Raven didn't look away, didn't flinch when the body hit the ground, or when sirens started wailing in the distance. She'd crossed a line tonight, stepped out of the role of victim or savior into something more complicated, a woman who chose her own damnation. When Ethan finally turned to her, blood on his hands and murder in his eyes, she met his gaze without trembling. We're even now, she said. We were never even. He pulled her against him, and she felt his heart hammering against her cheek. You keep saving me from things I don't deserve to survive. Then stop deserving it, she whispered, and just survive anyway. 6 months later, autumn painted the estate in shades of ending. Raven Cole stood in the garden where she'd first seen him, no longer wearing the uniform that had made her invisible. She'd left the position herself, not because Ethan had freed her, but because she'd finally understood that freedom wasn't given. It was taken, claimed, seized from the hands of people who thought they owned you. She worked at the foundation now, the one his father had used to play God with people's lives. She was dismantling it piece by piece, rebuilding it into something that helped instead of controlled. Ethan had given her the authority. She'd given herself the purpose. He appeared beside her without announcement, the way he always did, drawn by something neither of them could name, and both of them had stopped trying to escape. The board approved your proposal, he said. No greeting. They'd moved beyond the performance of pleasantries into something more honest. Good. She didn't look at him, but she felt his presence, like gravity. Your father's legacy deserves to be something better than machinery. So does mine. That made her turn. He looked different now, not softer, exactly, but worn in ways that suggested he'd stopped trying to be invulnerable. Power still had its price. He still paid it. But somewhere in the aftermath of betrayal and blood, he'd learned that strength could coexist with honesty. You still have nightmares, she observed. Not a question. So do you. Truth without flinching. They'd built their foundation on ruins and called it progress. Are you staying? He asked. And for once the question had no edge of possession. Just genuine uncertainty. The kind that came from knowing someone could leave and choosing to hope they wouldn't. Raven considered the estate spread before them, the wealth, the danger, the complicated man who'd invaded her privacy and saved her life and given her the tools to dismantle everything his father built. She thought about invisibility and how she'd worn it like armor, about being seen and how it had nearly destroyed her, about how she'd survived both and emerged as something neither victim nor savior, but simply herself. I'm staying, she said, not because you want me to, not because I owe you, because I choose to. He smiled small, genuine, devastatingly rare. That's the only reason that matters. They stood together in the garden as afternoon light turned gold, then amber, then gone. Two people who knew the worst of each other and stayed anyway. Who'd learned that being seen could rescue you or ruin you. And sometimes, if you were brave enough or foolish enough, it did both. Raven Cole had been invisible once. Now she was unforgettable. And she'd done it without losing herself.